What does it really mean to be a great president? Is greatness measured by bold policies, by victories on the world stage, or by the quiet moral compass of a man who never stopped serving, even long after he left the Oval Office? When we talk about American presidents, names like Washington, Lincoln, and Roosevelt often come to mind. But there's one man whose story stands apart because his most profound impact may have come after he left power. Today, we're diving into the life of Jimmy Carter, peanut farmer, naval officer, governor, the 39th President of the United States, and perhaps the most remarkable ex-president America has ever seen. James Earl Carter Jr. was born on October 1, 1924, in the tiny town of Plains, Georgia. His upbringing was modest. His father was a farmer and businessman, and his mother a nurse who often worked long hours. Life in the rural South during the Great Depression was tough. Carter grew up in a segregated environment, surrounded by both hardship and community. He was the boy who milked cows before dawn, sold peanuts in town, and read by the glow of kerosene lamps at night. But behind the simplicity of his rural childhood was ambition. Carter became the first in his family to attend college. After Georgia Southwestern and Georgia Tech, he entered the U.S. Naval Academy, graduating in 1946. There, he trained as a naval officer and served on submarines, even joining Admiral Hyman Rickover's pioneering nuclear submarine program. The Navy offered him a promising career, but when his father died in 1953, Carter returned to Plains to take over the family peanut farm. It was a decision that seemed like a step backward at the time, but it would ultimately anchor him to the people and place that shaped his worldview. Running a peanut farm grounded Carter in the struggles of ordinary Americans. He rebuilt the struggling business, worked side by side with black and white laborers, and saw firsthand the economic and social divides of the South. The civil rights movement was unfolding, and though cautious at first, Carter gradually embraced desegregation and equal rights. That moral conviction would later define him. He entered politics in the early 1960s, serving in the Georgia State Senate, and in 1970, he ran for governor. His campaign was controversial. He sometimes appealed to conservative racial sentiments to win, but once in office, he stunned the state. In his inaugural address, he declared, "The time for racial discrimination is over." For a white Southern governor in 1971, those words were bold, even radical. They marked Carter as a man willing to risk popularity for principle. By 1976, the country was weary. Vietnam had divided the nation, and the Watergate scandal had shattered trust in government. People longed for honesty. Carter, the outsider from Georgia, with a warm smile and the promise, "I'll never lie to you," captured that longing perfectly. Against all odds, he won the Democratic nomination and then narrowly defeated Gerald Ford in the general election. At 52, Carter became president. Symbolically, he walked from the Capitol to the White House on Inauguration Day, ditching the limousine to show humility and accessibility. To many, Carter represented a breath of fresh air, a leader untainted by Washington corruption. Carter's presidency was ambitious, but it often collided with the limits of politics. He believed deeply in human rights and tried to make them the cornerstone of American foreign policy. Instead of focusing solely on Cold War rivalries, he argued that America's role was to defend freedom and dignity worldwide. Admirable to many, naive to others. His greatest success came in 1978 at Camp David, where he spent 13 grueling days mediating between Egyptian President Anwar Sadat and Israeli Prime Minister Menachem Begin. Against the odds, he brought them to sign the Camp David Accords, the first peace agreement between Israel and an Arab state. It was Carter at his best, patient, moral, unrelenting. At home, he faced an energy crisis. Gas stations had lines stretching for blocks, and Carter urged conservation. He appeared on television in a cardigan sweater, asking Americans to turn down thermostats and rethink consumption. He even installed solar panels on the White House roof, decades before climate change became a political talking point. Some admired his foresight, but others mocked him as gloomy and uninspiring. His decision to return the Panama Canal to Panamanian control was also controversial. Many Americans saw it as weakness, but Carter argued it was a matter of fairness and global credibility. Once again, principle over popularity. Yet despite these achievements, Carter's presidency was plagued with crises. Inflation soared, unemployment climbed, and interest rates reached record highs. Families felt squeezed. When Carter delivered his 1979 Crisis of Confidence speech, he spoke earnestly about the need for sacrifice and renewal. But many Americans heard not encouragement, but reproach, as if his president was blaming them for the country's troubles. The most defining blow came in Iran. Revolutionaries stormed the U.S. Embassy in Tehran and took 52 Americans hostage. For 444 agonizing days, the crisis dragged on. Carter tried diplomacy. He approved a daring but doomed rescue mission, and he endured the daily images of blindfolded hostages on the evening news. By the time the hostages were released, on the very day Ronald Reagan took the oath of office, Carter's presidency had already been judged a failure in the eyes of many. His leadership style added to the criticism. Carter was meticulous, even micromanaging details like the White House tennis court schedule. Admirable as his work ethic was, it made him seem more like a professor than a decisive commander-in-chief. In 1980, battered by economic woes and foreign crises, he lost re-election in a landslide to Reagan. For many, that would have been the end of the story. But for Carter, it was only the beginning. Freed from politics, he poured his energy into humanitarian work. In 1982, he and Rosalind founded the Carter Center, dedicated to promoting human rights, democracy, and global health. Through the center, Carter monitored elections in fragile democracies, giving legitimacy to fledgling governments. He championed the fight against neglected tropical diseases, leading efforts that reduced guinea worm disease from millions of cases to just a handful. He swung hammers with Habitat for Humanity, building homes for the poor well into his 80s. And he kept teaching Sunday school in Plains, Georgia, even into his 90s, drawing crowds that wanted to see not the president, but the man. In 2002, Carter was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for his decades of peacemaking and humanitarian work. By then, the world no longer measured him by inflation charts or approval ratings. Instead, they saw a man who had turned defeat into a mission, who had lived his faith in action. So, how do we remember Jimmy Carter? As president, his record was mixed. A visionary on human rights and energy, a peacemaker in the Middle East, but overwhelmed by economic troubles and foreign crises. Yet as a man, his moral integrity and lifelong service set him apart. Carter once said, "I have one life and one chance to make it count for something. My faith demands that I do whatever I can, wherever I can, whenever I can, for as long as I can." And maybe that's the answer to our opening question. Greatness isn't always about the 4 years in office. Sometimes it's about what you do with the rest of your life. So, was Jimmy Carter an underrated president? Or was he simply a better ex-president than the country ever expected? However you judge him, his story is one of resilience, humility, and an unwavering belief that service never ends. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this journey into history, don't forget to subscribe and share your thoughts. Until next time, stay curious.